It was 2 in the morning in Wichita Falls, Texas, when the silence of the house grew so heavy it pressed against my chest. At first, I thought it was only the old wood groaning in the night, but then I heard the steady drag of boots across the hallway floorboards, slow and deliberate, the kind of rhythm that announces power before it even shows its face. My pulse jumped. My body stiffened, and I sat up in bed with the moonlight sketching faint shadows across the walls. The door burst open and the frame shook as Harold Mitchell filled it, my stepfather's chest heaving, the sour stench of whiskey rolling off him. His shirt hung open, stained with sweat, and in his hand gleamed an axe, its blade catching a strip of moonlight like a cruel smile. Behind him stood my mother Donna, her arms folded, her face unreadable except for the faint curl of a smirk tugging at her lips. Harold's voice, thick and low, cut through the dark. "You are not mine. Tonight, you learn your place." His hand clamped around my arm, and he yanked me from the bed, throwing me to the floor so hard my shoulder screamed. I begged him to stop, but his grip only tightened as the smell of whiskey washed over me. The axe lifted high above his head, a black silhouette against the dim hall light, and for one fleeting second I believed he might hesitate. But mercy never came. The blade struck a white-hot explosion, tearing through the side of my head as my balance collapsed and warmth poured down my neck. My hand came away wet. My scream ripped through the night, raw and animal, but worse than the pain was what followed. My mother's voice, low and cold, whispered with a smirk carved across her lips. "Serves you right." The betrayal split me deeper than the steel. Harold raised the axe again, his eyes burning with satisfaction, and from the corner of my vision I caught a shadow in the hallway, Dylan leaning lazily against the wall, his grin faint and cruel as if this spectacle were nothing more than entertainment. My vision blurred, but rage surged hotter than fear. I shoved against the dresser with the strength left in me, sliding past Harold's boots as the axe slammed into the doorframe, splinters raining across my back. I clawed forward, nails tearing the boards, scraping my skin raw, every inch agony, yet every inch defiance. The front door loomed ahead, my blood slicking the knob as I twisted until it groaned open. Cold Texas air rushed in and slapped my skin, reviving me for one more crawl. Gravel tore my hands and knees as I dragged myself into the night, leaving a trail behind me, the house glowing faint in the distance. They did not chase me. They did not need to. They believed silence would finish what the axe had begun. My vision narrowed, the stars overhead, cold and endless, but I whispered hoarse, "They will not erase me." That whisper became my anchor. At 2 in the morning, when the axe fell and my mother smirked, it should have been my ending. Instead, it was my beginning. Wichita Falls, Texas always wore a mask. To outsiders, it looked like one of those proud small towns where everyone nodded politely at the diner, where church bells on Sunday morning rolled across the streets like a hymn promising order, and where the families with the biggest trucks and the steadiest handshakes were treated as the backbone of the community. I knew that mask well because I had grown up inside it, watching the town bend its head to men like Harold Mitchell. By the time I turned 19, Harold had already perfected his role as the pillar of Wichita Falls. He was a broad man with oil-filled shoulders and a voice that carried across churchyards. On weekday mornings, he woke before dawn, not because he had to, but because he liked being seen as the man who never slept past the rooster. On Sundays, he marched Donna into St. Mary's with his Bible tucked neatly under one arm, nodding at every deacon and elder as though they had been waiting all week just for his presence. People called him dependable, godly, a man who knew discipline. They shook his hand with respect and repeated his name when talking about what made the community strong. But the house at the edge of town told a different story. Behind closed doors, Harold's strength was nothing more than domination. He demanded silence the way other men demanded air. Every word that came from me was a challenge to his rule, and every challenge was met with punishment. He had stepped into our lives after my real father died when I was 9. At first, I believed he might bring stability, but stability in Harold's world meant control. Donna married him quickly, perhaps out of fear of raising 2 children alone. perhaps out of a need to secure her own place in a town that prized appearances above everything else. Whatever her reasons, she folded into his shadow so completely that I rarely saw her speak above a whisper once the front door closed. Donna Mitchell had the face of a churchwoman, soft around the eyes, always ready with a pie for a neighbor's potluck. She kept her hair styled in curls that glistened under the church lights, her dresses pressed neatly as if they had never touched dishwater or sweat. People admired her devotion. They thought her silence meant faith, but in our kitchen, that silence became sharper than knives. She never raised a hand, but she never raised her voice either, not when Harold's temper thundered through the house, not when his words cut me down until I felt smaller than dust. Her lips tightened, her eyes looked away, and she told herself that silence kept the peace. For me, silence was abandonment. Then there was Dylan. At 22, my half-brother carried the Mitchell name as though it had been forged into his skin. Harold's blood ran in him, and that was all that mattered. Dylan strutted across the ranch land as if every acre already belonged to him, as if my presence was nothing more than a shadow in his path. Neighbors clapped him on the back and told him he was becoming a fine man, one who would take over the Mitchell legacy one day. He liked to remind me of that at every opportunity, smirking whenever Harold praised him at dinner, throwing digs my way about how I should fetch the iced tea instead of speaking about real matters. To him, I was invisible until mocking me gave him more shine. I had tried to find my escape through the military. When I earned my place at Fort Sill in Oklahoma, I thought I had broken free. Wearing the uniform gave me a sense of belonging Harold could never strip away. For the first time, I felt that my strength mattered, that discipline could be built through purpose rather than fear. Yet even that achievement could not sever the chain that tied me back home. Harold insisted I return whenever he called it family duty, and Donna reinforced his demand with quiet pleas about keeping peace. Wichita Falls had its hooks in me, dragging me back under the roof that had suffocated me since childhood. At church, the mask never slipped. I remember standing in the back pew, my uniform pressed, my hair tied tight, while Harold accepted compliments about raising a son like Dylan. No one asked me about Fort Sill. No one even mentioned my service. When I walked by, they gave polite nods, but nothing more. To them, I was Harold's stepdaughter, a detail easily erased in the shadow of his reputation. The cruelest part was how much Harold enjoyed that public image. He polished it the way other men polished rifles, making sure every dent was smoothed over, every whisper of doubt buried. If anyone had seen bruises on my arm or the weariness in my eyes, they looked away. Wichita Falls ran on silence, and Harold knew it. That silence shaped Donna, too. She told herself she was surviving. She told herself that keeping still was better than making things worse. She would serve Harold his dinner, sit beside him in church, and smile just enough to reassure the town that all was well. But in the dark of our home, her silence carved me out of existence. When Harold humiliated me, she stared at the floor. When Dylan laughed at me, she turned her back. When I begged for help, she whispered only, "Do not stir trouble." To me, that was not survival. That was betrayal painted with lipstick and Sunday dresses. As for Dylan, his arrogance only grew. He carried himself with the certainty of a boy who had been told all his life that he was destined to inherit. He rode Harold's approval like a parade float, waving it in my face whenever possible. If I washed dishes, he told me I was good at women's work. If I mentioned Fort Sill, he laughed and said, "Soldier girl thinks she matters." He did not need fists to cut me down. His words, sharpened by Harold's pride, did the job well enough. By the time I returned home on leave, I felt like a soldier walking back into enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards, every slam of the screen door carried memories of humiliation, yet the town itself looked unchanged. Wichita Falls still smelled of barbecue smoke curling from porches, still rang with church bells on Sunday, still paraded Harold as a man of backbone. People tipped their hats to him at the diner, clapped Dylan on the shoulder outside the feed store, and told Donna what a blessing it must be to live with such men. None of them saw what happened when the curtains closed, or maybe they saw and chose not to. Silence was easier. In that silence, I carried my own truth, the one no neighbor dared to speak. Harold Mitchell was not a man of God or discipline. He was a man who ruled with fear. Donna was not a devoted wife. She was a woman who abandoned her daughter for the safety of her own mask. Dylan was not a golden son. He was a reflection of everything Harold demanded arrogance without consequence. And I, Clara Mitchell, was not invisible. Not anymore. Every moment I spent back under that roof reminded me of the chain Harold had wrapped around me since childhood. Every compliment he received in public tightened it. Every smirk Dylan threw across the table added weight. Every silence from Donna became another link. And yet, beneath all that weight, something in me had shifted. Fort Sill had taught me that discipline could be used for survival, but it had also taught me that silence was not the same as respect. In Wichita Falls, silence was worship. In my world, silence was complicity. That difference would become the fire Harold could not smother. By the time I turned 16, humiliation in the Mitchell house had become as constant as the Texas heat. Every day felt like a lesson Harold was determined to carve into me, and every lesson carried the same message: I was nothing. The first time I understood how deep that lesson ran was the day the letter arrived. I had spent months pouring every ounce of myself into an essay for the ROTC summer program. Late nights with a flickering desk lamp, hands cramped from rewriting drafts, heart pounding with hope that someone outside this town would see me. When the envelope came with my name printed sharp across the front, my chest lifted with a joy I could barely contain. I ran across the yard, barefoot gravel biting into my feet, shouting for my mother. She was folding laundry on the porch, and for once there was a softness in her eyes when I waved the letter in the air. But before I could finish reading it aloud, Harold stepped out of the house, his shadow cutting across the porch. He snatched the paper from my hand, scanned the words, and without hesitation ripped it straight down the middle. The sound split me as cleanly as the paper itself. "Texas girls stay home," he said flatly. "No daughter of mine will march in boots." He dropped the torn halves into the dirt, turned his back, and walked inside. My mother's hands trembled as she clutched the laundry basket tighter. For a second, I thought she might kneel down, gather the pieces, tell me I mattered, but instead she carried the basket inside, her silence trailing behind her like a cold wind. Dylan came out from the barn just in time to see me kneeling in the dirt. He laughed, his voice carrying across the yard like a taunt meant for the entire world. "Guess you are just a dreamer soldier girl." The pieces of that letter became my first true entry in the journal I had started to hide under my mattress. I taped them across the page and pressed so hard with my pen that the words cut grooves through the paper. If they would not let me keep my victory in the open, then I would keep it in secret proof that I was not imagining my worth. Humiliation in Wichita Falls was not limited to the house. It spread like smoke through every corner of the community. At St. Mary's, Harold sat tall in the front pew, Dylan beside him with his easy grin, Donna nodding dutifully with her Bible in hand. I sat at the back, invisible, my uniform pressed from Fort Sill leave days or my Sunday dress ironed with care, but no one noticed. Pastor Whitmore would beam at Harold during sermons about God's order for families, calling him a man of faith, a man of strength. Congregants would whisper about how blessed Donna was to have such a husband and how proud Dylan must make him. If eyes drifted back to me at all, they carried polite smiles quickly redirected. Invisible. That was the word that haunted me. One Sunday, two women near the choir loft whispered with casual cruelty, as if describing the weather. "Dylan Mitchell will run that ranch well one day," one said. "His sister never amounted to much," replied the other. My jaw clenched until my lip bled, my hands shaking against the hymn book. I wanted to stand up to scream that I had dreams, that I was a soldier, that I had fought for every step I had taken. But Harold's eyes pinned me from across the pew, cold and commanding, and silence pressed down heavier than their words. The cruelest scenes came during celebrations. Dylan's birthdays turned the ranch into a stage set for Harold's pride. String lights across the yard, barbecue smoke drifting in the air. Neighbors arriving with casseroles music spilling from an old radio. At the center sat Dylan Cake piled high with frosting his name in bold letters. Guests clapped Harold on the back and praised the young man he was raising. I carried plates, fetched napkins, poured sweet tea, invisible in the glow of their approval. My own birthday just 2 weeks before had passed without mention, without a candle or a slice of cake. One year I tried to lighten the sting, whispering at the table, "Guess no cake for me." A few guests chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Harold's head snapped toward me, his voice booming loud enough for everyone to hear. "This night is about your brother." His words cracked the air like a whip. Conversation froze, then stumbled back into forced laughter. Dylan leaned to whisper something to a friend, and their laughter swelled. My cheeks burned so hot I thought they might melt, but I stood frozen, a stack of plates in my hands, playing the role they had written for me. Later that night, when the last truck rattled down the road and the yard grew silent, I slipped to my room and wrote every detail in my journal. The laughter, the cake, the way people looked away instead of defending me. Writing became the only proof that I had not invented my pain. Another time at a church picnic, Aunt Ruth, one of the rare relatives who asked about me, turned kindly and asked how school was going. I brightened, telling her about a project I had led about the joy of helping younger students. Before I could finish, Harold's laugh sliced through my words. "Do not take her too seriously, Ruth. She has always had her head in cheap novels." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. I protested, insisting it was real work, that it mattered. Harold shook his head, his grin wide as a blade. "Clara has always been good at telling tales. Do not confuse that with reality." The laughter grew louder, sealing my humiliation. My throat closed, my eyes burned, and I walked away into the fields with cicadas screaming in my ears. That night, I copied a quote into my journal: "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Underneath, I wrote in my own trembling hand, "Silence is how they erase me." I will not let them. The humiliations piled one after another until they became ritual. At reunions, Dylan introduced me as his loser sister. At school events, Harold nodded approvingly when classmates laughed at me. At family dinners, I was ordered to serve, then dismissed whenever I tried to speak. Each moment hammered the same message into me: I was not enough. I would never belong. Yet the more they tried to erase me, the more determined I became to remember. Silence could be their weapon, but it could also be mine. My silence, sharpened and stored on paper, became a memory they could not rewrite. By 17, bitterness had settled deep, but so had clarity. I understood that the world Harold built depended on everyone playing their role. Harold as the strong man, Donna as the dutiful wife, Dylan as the heir, and me as the silent shadow. I knew that if I ever stepped out of that script, the backlash would come. And it did. One night during Dylan's 18th birthday celebration, the yard was filled with neighbors again, music and laughter swirling under the string lights. I stood near the porch carrying a tray of cornbread when I heard Harold boasting about Dylan's future. Someone asked lightly about me, perhaps out of politeness. Harold waved a dismissive hand. "She lives in stories, not reality." The crowd laughed and Dylan smirked as if the line had been rehearsed just for him. I felt heat flood my body, and without thinking, I said, "Maybe I want more than chores and silence." The laughter stopped. Every eye turned toward me. For a moment, I thought I had finally broken through. Then Harold's face darkened, his hand slammed the table, rattling dishes. "Enough," he roared. His hand gripped my arm so tight, bruises bloomed by morning. Donna stood frozen in the doorway, her lips pressed thin. Later, when I begged her to say something, anything, she whispered, "Do not make it worse." That whisper carved into me deeper than Harold's grip. Invisible. That word echoed again. But it was no longer the same. Invisibility was no longer proof that I did not exist. It became proof of how terrified they were of my voice. Each humiliation, each dismissal, each silence turned into ammunition in my journal. Each page filled with dates, words, places, bruises, laughter, all cataloged like evidence. I was a soldier in training, even if they could not see it, and I was building a record of war. The rituals of humiliation had taught me more than pain. They had taught me the shape of silence, the weight of complicity, and the power of memory. And though the years of being invisible pressed hard against me, they also sharpened me. By the time I left for Fort Sill, I knew that one day silence would break. The cracks were already forming. All it would take was one blow to split them wide open. By the time I returned from my first months of training at Fort Sill, I understood that survival was not just about strength, it was about preparation. Soldiers were taught to keep records, to log details with precision, to treat memory as a weapon. I carried that lesson back into Wichita Falls, not in uniform, but in secret. If Harold and Donna wanted me invisible, then I would make my invisibility the perfect cover. Hidden under my mattress was a battered green notebook, the kind issued in basic training, where I had begun to keep an evidence log. I wrote down everything with military precision: dates, times, the exact words Harold used when he spit venom across the dinner table, the look on Donna's face when she turned away as Dylan shoved me in the mud, the bruises, the cuts, the long nights of silence. Each page was a report, each line a record that could not be denied. When I bled from barbed wire scratches, I pressed the page against the wound so the paper carried the stain. When my arm bruised dark from Harold's grip, I photographed it with the cheap phone I kept hidden in a shoebox under the bed. To anyone else, it might have looked like the scribblings of a bitter girl. To me, it was reconnaissance. I learned to write without shaking. At first, the pen trembled in my hand, words slanting into chaos, but soon the act became ritual. I would wait until the house settled into the heavy silence of midnight, then slip the notebook from its hiding place. A small flashlight hidden inside a sock drawer gave me just enough glow to write. My breathing slowed, my body tense with the fear of being caught, but my focus sharpened. I wrote like a soldier filing an after-action report. Objective survive. Outcome recorded. Notes, silence continues. The journal was not just a container for pain. It became my anchor. Each time Harold told me I was worthless, I wrote the words down, and suddenly they belonged to the page, not to me. Each time Dylan laughed, I described the smirk in detail, stripping it of its power. Each time Donna whispered not to stir trouble, I copied the phrase like evidence of complicity. Writing was my way of refusing to vanish. If they insisted my life was invisible, I would make sure the record proved otherwise. Fort Sill had also given me something else: discipline. I had learned to clean a rifle in the dark, to follow orders under exhaustion, to keep composure when chaos reigned. At home, I used that same discipline to prepare. I saved audio clips on the hidden phone when Harold's voice boomed loud enough for the microphone to catch. I learned where the loose floorboards creaked the least so I could move without sound. I mapped the house in my mind like an enemy compound, noting exits, weak points, hiding spots. The soldier in me refused to leave Wichita Falls unarmed, even if the only weapons I had were memory and patience. I promised myself that the evidence would matter someday. Maybe it would be for the sheriff, maybe for a lawyer, maybe just for me when the gaslighting grew too sharp and I needed proof that the bruises were real. Whatever the reason, it gave me strength. Each page added to the notebook made me stand a little straighter, made my voice a little clearer in my own head. Silence was not safety, but silence could be transformed. Harold never suspected. He believed obedience was complete because I carried plates, washed clothes, and held my tongue. He mistook my quiet for surrender, not realizing it was reconnaissance. Donna, too, failed to see. She thought she had crushed the last of my resistance, that her whispers of keep peace had bent me fully. Dylan was too arrogant to imagine I had any power at all. They all underestimated me, and that underestimation became my shield. I remember one night when Harold came home from the oil field, drunk and raging about money. He accused me of wasting his hard work on useless dreams. He slammed his hand against the wall so hard a frame fell and cracked. I said nothing, only lowered my head, but later that night I wrote it all down. Date, time, exact words, damage to property. Mother present silent. Dylan present laughing. It looked like a military report, cold and factual, but under the surface, it was a rebellion. I also began to collect items. A strand of hair pulled from my brush, stained with dried blood after Harold had shoved me against the doorframe. Photographs of torn clothing, small slips of paper where I recorded whispers I overheard between Harold and Dylan, talk of land of inheritance, of control. I slid them between the pages of the notebook like classified files. The shoebox under my bed grew heavier, but so did my resolve. At school in town, I still felt the weight of invisibility. Teachers who praised Dylan for football victories barely noticed me. Neighbors waved at Harold but avoided my eyes. Still, I carried my secret weapon in the back of my mind. No matter what they said, no matter how loudly silence pressed in, I had proof. The proof lived in ink and photographs in the discipline of a soldier who refused to let herself be erased. Some nights I whispered to myself as I wrote, "One day this will matter. One day silence will break." The words became a mantra steadying me when despair crept too close. The notebook was more than evidence. It was a lifeline. It told me I was not crazy, not dramatic, not invisible. It reminded me that each humiliation, each dismissal, each bruise was real and recorded. It gave me the strength to endure because endurance was not surrender. It was strategy. That strategy would become the reason I survived the night Harold swung the axe. Without the discipline of Fort Sill, without the habit of recording, without the knowledge that silence could be turned into proof, I might have lain down in that blood-soaked hallway and accepted the fate they had carved for me. Instead, I crawled, I fought, and I clung to the promise that the evidence waiting under my mattress would one day speak louder than their silence. I was invisible in Wichita Falls, but my notebook saw me, and that was enough to keep going. The summer before, everything broke open, carried a heat that never lifted. Wichita Falls baked under a sky so wide and merciless it felt like the sun itself was watching. Harold's temper seemed to rise with the temperature swelling into storms that had no place to go but through me. He had grown restless since Dylan had started talking about plans for the ranch, about deeds and ownership, about his future as Harold's heir. The more Dylan strutted, the more Harold wanted control over everything else, especially me. I was home on leave from Fort Sill, hoping for a quiet week before my next round of training. Instead, every day felt like a test designed to remind me that in Harold's house, I had no rights, no autonomy, no voice. The first sign of escalation came at the dinner table. Harold leaned back in his chair, a stack of papers in front of him, his eyes sharp with the glint of decision. Dylan sat to his right, smug as ever, while Donna laid out cornbread and beans, as if the meal might soften the words about to fall. Harold tapped the papers once loud enough to still the room. "Clara, you need to sign these." His voice was calm, but the calmness was worse than a shout. I glanced down at the documents, recognizing the deed transfer a change that would place more of the property in Dylan's name. My name had been crossed out in places where my father's will had left me a share. My stomach clenched. "No," I said quietly. "I will not sign that." The air thickened instantly. Dylan's smirk widened like he had been waiting for this moment. Harold's chair creaked as he leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "If you don't sign, you're no daughter of mine." His words cracked like a whip. Donna's hands trembling as she refilled his glass of tea. Dylan chuckled under his breath. "Soldier girl thinks she has rights." That night I wrote the exchange in my notebook, word for word. Time, date. Harold demanded signature. I refused. Donna present, silent. Dylan mocking. I could feel my pulse in my ears as I wrote my pen carving grooves into the paper. It was no longer just humiliation. It was escalation, a threat that hung in the air, heavier than the heat. The next days only added fuel. Harold followed me from room to room, his voice low and sharp, pressing me to reconsider. He barked orders with a force that made dishes rattle, and when I refused, he slammed his fist against the walls until frames tilted crooked. Dylan took every chance to echo his father, calling me coward, dreamer, traitor. He blocked the hallway, forcing me to brush past him while he whispered taunts under his breath. Donna moved silently around us. Her lips pinched her eyes, flicking away, her silence now a scream of complicity. The turning point came one blistering afternoon when Harold found me in the barn. I had been mucking stalls, sweat streaming down my back, the air thick with hay dust. He stepped into the doorway, axe slung casually over his shoulder as though it were nothing more than a tool. "Sign the papers, Clara." His voice was calm again, but his grip on the handle told another story. My hands shook against the pitchfork, but I steadied myself. "No." His face darkened, sweat dripping from his temples, eyes burning with the kind of rage that made my chest tighten. Donna appeared behind him, holding a dish towel, her expression unreadable. Dylan leaned against the barn wall, grinning. Harold stepped closer. "Do you really think the army will protect you here?" Do you really think your little notebook will matter when no one believes you? His words pressed into me like weights, but I refused to drop my gaze. Then I won't be your daughter, I whispered back. The silence that followed was worse than a slap. Harold's jaw clenched, his grip tightened on the axe, and for a heartbeat I thought he might swing right there in the heat of the barn. Donna looked down at the ground, Dylan chuckled, and Harold finally turned on his heel, spitting into the dirt. You'll regret this. His voice trailed behind him as he stalked back toward the house. That night, I hid the notebook in a new spot, terrified that he might search my room. My hands shook as I copied every word of the barn confrontation, every detail of the sweat, the axe, the grin on Dylan's face. I ended the entry with a single line: "Storm is coming." The following week, tension tightened its grip on the house. Doors slammed in the night. Harold's voice rumbled through the walls, shouting about respect, about betrayal, about discipline. Dylan began circling me like a predator waiting for cracks. He cornered me in the hallway, whispering in my ear, "You'll sign eventually, or he'll make sure you don't have a hand left to hold the pen." His laughter followed me down the corridor, sharp and cruel. Even small moments became unbearable. At church, Donna smiled as if nothing was wrong, passing peach cobbler to the women beside her, nodding at Harold's booming laugh. Dylan shook hands like the future ranch owner he was already pretending to be. No one looked at me long enough to notice the tension thrumming beneath my skin. The silence of Wichita Falls carried on blind and complicit. But inside, the house, silence was cracking. I felt it in the way Harold's eyes lingered longer when he passed me. I felt it in the weight of the axe left leaning by the door, as though placed in view for a reason. I felt it in the hush that followed my refusal, the kind of hush that comes before a storm breaks. Each night I lay awake, heart pounding, waiting for the sound of boots across the floor. I told myself I was prepared, that I had evidence that Fort Sill had trained me for worse. But nothing can truly prepare you for the moment when rage decides to spill over. The days blurred, each one hotter than the last, each one pressing tighter against me. The notebook grew heavier with entries, my handwriting sharper, my resolve colder. Every insult, every threat, every silent betrayal went into the log. Every time Dylan laughed, I noted it. Every time Donna turned her eyes away, I underlined it. Each page was a countdown. On the final night before the attack, the air inside the house felt electric, as though lightning was about to strike. Harold stumbled through the kitchen bottles, clattering, his voice hoarse from shouting about betrayal. Dylan lounged on the couch, smirking at the chaos. Donna stood in the doorway, dish towel in hand, her smirk faint but unmistakable. I slipped into my room and pulled out the notebook, my fingers trembling as I wrote, "Storm is here. If I survive, these pages will tell the truth. If I don't, maybe one day someone will read them." I tucked the notebook under my pillow and whispered a prayer, not for peace, but for strength. I did not know it then, but within hours the storm would break and the axe Harold carried so casually would swing for real. It was 2 a.m. when the sound that had haunted my sleep for years finally arrived, the slow groan of floorboards carrying the weight of Harold's boots. Wichita Falls nights were usually thick with cicadas and the hum of air conditioners, but that night everything was unnervingly still, as if even the crickets knew to hold their breath. My room was heavy with heat, the sheets clinging to my skin, my uniform folded neatly on the chair by the desk. I had left my notebook tucked under my pillow, its presence a strange comfort like a silent ally. My eyes shot open at the creak outside my door. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. The door burst open with a crack like thunder splinters scattering across the floor. Harold filled the doorway, his bulk blotting out the hall light. His shirt was half undone, sweat slicking his chest, whiskey fumes rolling off him so strong they made my stomach churn. In his hands gleamed the axe, its blade catching the moonlight spilling through the window sharp and merciless. Behind him stood Donna, arms folded across her chest, her face pale, but her lips curled in something colder than fear, satisfaction. Dylan's shadow lingered further down the hall, his grin just visible in the half-light. Harold's eyes locked on me, bloodshot and gleaming with a fury I had never seen so concentrated. "You're not my blood," he growled, his voice hoarse but steady. "Tonight you'll learn your place." His words froze me harder than the sight of the axe itself. My body trembled, yet some instinct drilled into me by Fort Sill snapped me into a strange focus. Assess, react, survive. I scrambled back against the headboard, whispering, "Please don't do this." My voice sounded alien small, like it belonged to a child rather than a soldier. Harold laughed, low and guttural, the sound of a predator cornering its prey. He stepped closer, the axe rising in his grip. Donna did not move. She did not scream. Instead, she whispered almost sweetly, "Serves you right." That whisper shattered something in me deeper than fear. My own mother's betrayal rang louder than Harold's rage. The axe came down with a force that shook the walls. Pain exploded across my head as the blade tore into the side of my ear, slicing flesh, sending warmth pouring down my neck in hot streams. The sound was sickening, a crack and a tear that split the night open. I screamed raw and guttural, the sound ricocheting off the wooden walls. My hands shot up instinctively, blood slick between my fingers as I pressed desperately against the wound. The room spun, vision blurring, the metallic tang of blood flooding my mouth. Harold pulled the axe back, his breath ragged, his teeth bared in a grin that twisted my stomach. Donna smirked wider, her eyes glinting as if watching a lesson unfold. Dylan chuckled from the hall, his voice sharp. "Guess Soldier Girl isn't so tough now." My scream faltered into sobs, the world tilting as pain consumed me. Harold lifted the axe again, his muscles straining, his eyes wild. "Tonight I end your noise forever." Somewhere deep inside me, the soldier part of me, the part trained to act when fear threatens to paralyze, flared. My eyes darted to the dresser where my small training manual sat. With one desperate surge, I snatched the book and hurled it at Harold's face. The corner struck his cheek, making him stumble back just enough. Rage burned through his expression, but the stumble was my opening. I threw myself off the bed, crashing to the floor, dragging my bleeding body toward the door. The axe swung again, biting into the doorframe inches from my head, splinters raining down. I crawled, hands slipping in blood, my nightgown soaked and heavy, every movement sending agony screaming through me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest heaving as I pulled myself inch by inch across the floor. Harold's boots thundered behind me, his growl rumbling low. "Crawl all you want, you'll come back." Donna's voice followed cold and certain. "Let her crawl, she'll return." Her words ignited something fiercer than pain inside me. No, I thought not tonight. Not ever. I clawed at the floorboard's nails, splitting as I dragged myself into the hallway. My blood smeared behind me in dark streaks, undeniable proof of what they had done. The house became a tunnel of shadows, every corner filled with the echo of their laughter, every wall pressing closer. Dylan's voice floated down the hall, taunting. "Look at her crawling like a dog." The staircase loomed ahead, each step a mountain of agony. I heaved myself down, tumbling halfway, slamming against the railing, my vision flashing white with each impact. The living room spun the family Bible sitting neatly on the table, its presence a mockery. I pulled myself toward the front door, each inch a war against my failing body. Behind me, Harold cursed his boots, pounding the axe, scraping against the wall as he dragged it. Donna's silence pressed heavier than his rage. I reached the door, my hands slick with blood slipping against the knob. I twisted harder, the wood groaning as it opened. Cold Texas night air rushed in, hitting my sweat-soaked skin like ice. My lungs seized, but I forced them open, gulping the air as if it might save me. I stumbled onto the porch, collapsing against the boards, blood dripping through the cracks. The gravel driveway stretched ahead like an endless battlefield. Harold's voice rumbled from inside. "Let her crawl. The town won't believe her." The words chilled me more than the night air. They believed silence would finish me, that no neighbor would open a door, no sheriff would take my side. Their confidence struck harder than the axe. For a moment, despair clawed at me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I would bleed out on that gravel erased, just as they had always wanted. But then, something inside me roared louder than despair. Not here. Not tonight. My fists slammed against the gravel-sharp stones, tearing my palms as I dragged myself forward. Each scrape another scar, each inch another act of defiance. Blood smeared across the rocks, marking my path like a crimson trail. Stars stretched endless above me, cold witnesses to my agony. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries mingling with the ragged sound of my breath. I whispered through clenched teeth, "They will not erase me!" My voice, trembling and hoarse, became my anchor. Every gasp, every inch, every heartbeat was survival. My ear burned with fire. My body shuddered with cold, but I pressed on, crawling stone by stone toward the faint glow of the road beyond the gate. Behind me, the house loomed, its windows glowing faintly, shadows moving inside. I knew Harold stood there watching. I knew Donna's smirk followed me into the night. Dylan's laughter echoed faintly, carried on the wind. But ahead beyond, the pain beyond the blood, shimmered the faint light of the town. Fragile, distant, but real. That night, at 2 in the morning, crawling through gravel and blood, I understood the truth more deeply than ever before. They could strip me of family, of safety, even of flesh, but they could not strip me of will. I was not just a girl crawling for her life. I was a soldier carrying the weight of every humiliation, every silence, every betrayal, and turning it into forward motion. They tried to end me with an axe. Instead, they ignited the fire that would bring their silence crashing down. The gravel beneath me cut deep into my hands and knees, sharp stones grinding into raw skin already slick with blood. Every movement sent shocks of agony through my head, where the axe had torn me open, hot liquid still trickling down my neck. The night air of Wichita Falls wrapped around me, humid and heavy, carrying the faint smell of oil and dust. I dragged myself inch by inch down the driveway, each breath scraping my throat like broken glass. Behind me, the porch light of the house glowed faintly, a reminder of the prison I had just escaped. I could almost feel Harold's eyes on me standing inside, with the axe still in hand, Donna beside him with her cold smirk, Dylan's laugh echoing faintly. "Let her crawl," Harold had said. "She will come back." The words gnawed at me as I clawed forward because he believed them. He believed no one in Wichita Falls would stand against him. The first house I reached was the Harris place, a modest brick home with a wide porch swing that creaked in the summer breeze. I crawled across their lawn, blood smearing the grass, and slammed my palm weakly against the wooden steps. Evelyn Harris, 62 years old, a widow who had lived across from us for decades, had once given me sweet tea when I was a child. For a flicker of a second hope sparked that she might come to the door now. I pounded again, my voice breaking. "Help me! Please! My stepdad!" The axe. "My mom!" She laughed. My words were weak, slurred, drowned by the night. A light flicked on inside. Curtains shifted, a shadow moved. My chest lifted with desperate hope. Then just as quickly the curtains fell shut. The light clicked off. Silence swallowed the night. My stomach twisted with a deeper pain than the wound itself. She heard me. She saw me. And still she chose silence. I dragged myself back down the porch steps, gravel biting into me again as I pulled toward the next house. The Thompsons. Their porch light flared to life, their dog barking furiously inside. I slammed my fist against their door, leaving bloody smears across the wood. "Please," I begged, voice cracking. "Help me." My stepdad. The axe. Silence answered. I heard whispers, the faint scrape of blinds, and then nothing. The barking stopped. The light went dark. Tears mixed with the blood on my cheeks as I crawled back onto the road. Each rejection pressed harder than the wound itself. The town was living up to Harold's words. No one would open a door. No one would defy him. For years they had praised him in church, clapped him on the back at rodeos, eaten Donna's peach cobbler at potlucks. They had built him into a pillar, and now they were too afraid to admit he was made of rot. Their silence was as sharp as the axe had been. The road stretched endless before me, a ribbon of gravel and dust glowing faintly under the moonlight. My body sagged with exhaustion, but I pressed forward, dragging myself with fists and elbows, my legs barely working. Each movement left a crimson smear across the ground. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries carrying across the open fields, mingling with the faint hum of a highway somewhere beyond town. My vision blurred stars above swimming together in streaks of light. I whispered to myself, clinging to the words like a rope. Not here. Not tonight. I will not die in his silence. My voice trembled, but it anchored me. Each repetition was a spark that kept me moving. My ear throbbed with fire, the stump of flesh soaking my nightgown until it clung heavy against my skin. My hands tore open on the stone's skin, peeling raw, yet I did not stop. Pain was no longer an enemy. Pain was proof I was still alive. As I neared the edge of Main Street, houses gave way to storefronts closed tight against the night. The old diner's neon sign flickered faintly, casting pale red light across the street. I collapsed once under its glow, my body shuddering with the urge to give in. For a long moment, I lay there, cheek pressed against the cool dust breath rattling in my chest. I thought of Harold's grin, Donna's smirk, Dylan's laugh, and the silence of the neighbors. Rage surged through me like lightning. No, if I died here, they would bury me in silence, write me off as nothing. I forced my body forward again, dragging myself toward the one place that might hold salvation, the sheriff's office. The Travis County Sheriff's Office sat at the far end of Main Street, a squat brick building with a blinking neon sign. The red and blue glow shimmered in the distance like a mirage. Each inch closer felt like crossing a battlefield, my arms trembling, my lungs seizing with every gasp. Porch lights flickered on as I passed houses along the way. Curtains shifted. Shadows moved. Faces glimpsed me crawling through blood and dirt and turned away. Doors shut. Lights clicked off. Every rejection was another nail driven into the coffin of the town's conscience. When I finally reached the gravel lot outside the sheriff's office, my body collapsed onto the stones. I clawed forward with the last of my strength, dragging myself until the wooden steps loomed above me. My vision tunneled the edges of the world, darkening. I slammed my fist against the first step, smearing it red. The neon sign buzzed above me, letters glowing faintly. Sheriff. My lips parted, words scraping out in a whisper barely louder than breath. My stepdad. The axe. Mom smirked. The glass door swung open. A deputy's eyes widened as he rushed toward me, his chair screeching back inside. "Ma'am, stay with us!" His voice cracked with urgency as he knelt, pressing his hands against my wound. The sting of pressure jolted me back into awareness. Blood slicked his gloves instantly, but he did not flinch. Another deputy shouted for EMS, his voice echoing against the brick walls. My vision blurred, their faces swimming above me in fluorescent light. My lips trembled as I forced the words out again, each one costing me more strength than I had. Stepdad. Axe. Mom. Smirked. The deputy leaned closer, catching every syllable, his jaw tightening, his eyes hardening. For the first time that night, someone heard me. And then, darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke, the sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nose, and the steady beep of a monitor ticked beside me. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum cutting through the haze. My body felt heavy, pinned to the hospital bed by layers of bandages and IV lines. The pain in my head roared back the moment I stirred, a constant reminder of the axe's bite. For a moment, I thought I was still trapped in Harold's house, that Donna's smirk hovered over me. Panic surged, my breath quickening until a calm voice cut through. "You're safe for now, honey. Just breathe." A nurse's hand steadied mine, her eyes soft but serious. Safe. The word felt foreign, almost impossible. Hours blurred. Each time I opened my eyes, I saw flashes. Doctors adjusting tubes, nurses whispering the red digits of a clock, crawling forward. But the image that never left me was Harold's grin and Donna's laugh. I repeated the words in my head like a mantra. My stepdad. The axe. Mom smirked. I had to make sure they were recorded, spoken, undeniable. By the second morning, Sheriff Robert Lane arrived. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, his face weathered from years of Texas sun. He carried his hat in one hand, his badge catching the light as he pulled a chair close to my bed. His voice was low, steady, not rushed. "Clara, I need to know what happened." His eyes held mine, patient but unwavering. My lips trembled dry and cracked, but the words spilled out anyway. Harold swung the axe. Donna was there. She smiled. Dylan watched. My voice broke, but I forced the truth out, each syllable scraping my throat. It wasn't rage. It was planned. Lane's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. Henry Mitchell's boy has caused trouble before, but this is different. And your mother standing there, that makes it something the town can't ignore. But you know how it is here. He has friends. He has ears everywhere. If we don't have proof, they'll bury this before it even reaches court. My stomach sank. I had lived under that truth my entire life, silence protecting him, silence erasing me. But I had something. My journal. I whispered, my voice barely audible. I wrote everything down. Dates, words, what they did. It's under my pillow at the house. Lane nodded slowly, his expression sharpening with resolve. We'll get it. But one book may not be enough. His words left a weight on my chest, a fear that evidence still might not pierce the wall of silence that had protected Harold for decades. That evening, the door to my room opened quietly. Evelyn Harris stood there, her shoulders stooped, her gray hair pulled back into a bun. She held a styrofoam cup of coffee in one trembling hand. "I should have come sooner," she murmured, her voice breaking. I froze my eyes, filling with tears. "You heard?" I whispered. She nodded, tears spilling. "I heard more than that, and I recorded it." My breath caught. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a small USB drive, her hand shaking as she offered it. Sheriff Lane, who had followed her in, took it gently and plugged it into his laptop. He set it on the table beside my bed and pressed play. The hospital room filled with the sounds I had thought were mine alone, to remember the splintering of wood as my door burst open, my screams ripping through the night, the sickening thud of the axe. Then, clear as a bell, Harold's roar, "You are nothing." And after it, sharp and unmistakable, Donna's laugh. My body trembled, tears streaming unchecked. Evelyn covered her mouth, sobbing softly. Sheriff Lane snapped the laptop shut, his jaw set like stone. "That's enough," he muttered, his voice hard. For the first time, I heard something in Wichita Falls I had never heard before. Determination. Evelyn lowered her hands, her voice shaking. I was afraid, she whispered, afraid of Harold, afraid of what people would say, but I can't be silent anymore. Silence isn't safety, it's complicity. Her words broke something open inside me. For the first time in years, I did not feel completely alone. My voice shook as I whispered, "Then I'm not alone anymore." Evelyn's hand reached across the bed, squeezing mine with a strength that belied her trembling. Within days, the investigation spread. Deputies searched the Mitchell house. They found the splintered doorframe where Harold's axe had landed, the quilt soaked with my blood, and the axe itself still streaked with red. Beneath my pillow, they found my notebook, its pages filled with years of humiliation and bruises cataloged in ink. Dates, times, words, proof. Harold tried to block the search, shouting about his rights, but the judge signed off the moment he heard the recording. Donna sat on the porch as deputies combed through the house. Her face was pale, lips pressed thin. She did not look at me when I was wheeled up in a hospital chair to identify evidence. She only murmured, "This family needs peace, not more trouble." The words stung, as if she believed peace could ever be built on silence and blood. I wanted to scream, to demand how silence had ever saved me, but the words caught in my throat. Sheriff Lane stood beside me, his hat in his hands, his voice low but steady. "This time, silence won't save them." His words echoed in my chest, filling the cracks with something new. Hope, fragile, but real. As the evidence piled higher, the town could no longer look away. Whispers began in the grocery store aisles. "Did you hear what Harold did?" "They say?" Clara lost her ear. Some dismissed it as gossip, but others lowered their voices, uncertain now. The Mitchell image of perfection was cracking, and through that cracklight was finally spilling in. I had my allies. I had my evidence. For the first time, I had a chance at truth. And that chance would soon carry me into court, where Harold's axe and Donna's smirk would no longer be hidden behind closed doors. The Travis County Courthouse in Austin loomed larger than life the morning the trial began. Its limestone walls glowed pale under the Texas sun, the tall windows reflecting a cloudless sky. The steps leading up to its double doors buzzed with reporters, their microphones poised, their cameras ready to capture the collapse of the Mitchell family myth. I stood at the bottom of those steps, leaning on a crutch. My ear bandaged my body still tender from wounds that throbbed with each heartbeat. The courthouse itself felt like a battlefield, and I was walking into it not as a soldier in uniform, but as a survivor carrying scars. Inside, the air smelled faintly of varnish dust and perfume from the women packed into the benches. Every seat was filled with townsfolk pressed shoulder to shoulder, their whispers weaving a current that rippled through the room. Some had once praised Harold after Sunday service. Others had eaten Donna's peach cobbler at potlucks. Now those same mouths whispered in disbelief, doubt, or shame. At the front of the room, Harold sat shackled at the wrists, his gray hair slicked back in a desperate attempt at dignity. His shoulders were broad, but his posture sagged, his jaw tight. Beside him sat Donna in a pale blue dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face schooled into neutrality. Dylan leaned against the wall in the gallery, arms crossed, his grin faint but smug, as though the trial were a show staged for his amusement. The prosecutor, a young woman named Melissa Reyes with sharp eyes and clipped words, rose to address the jury. She laid out the charges with precision: attempted murder, conspiracy, complicity. Her voice rang clear across the room, each syllable like a nail driven into the coffin of Harold's reputation. Then she called the first witness. Sheriff Lane took the stand, his broad shoulders filling the chair, his voice steady as he described the scene at the Mitchell house. The blood-soaked quilt, the axe streaked with red, the door frame splintered from repeated blows. He spoke of the journal found beneath my pillow, its pages cataloging years of insults and bruises written in my hand with dates and times. The jury shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at Harold, others fixing their eyes on the floor. Next came the recording. Evelyn Harris, trembling as she walked to the stand, placed the small device onto the evidence table. Melissa pressed play, and the courtroom filled with the sounds that had haunted me: the splintering of wood. My screams, Harold's roar, and then sharp as broken glass. Donna's laugh. Gasps rippled through the gallery, people turning in their seats to look at her. Donna's eyes flicked, her lips pressing thin, but she did not move. Melissa's voice cut through the murmurs. That is not the sound of a mother protecting her child. That is the sound of complicity. Harold slammed his hands against the defense table chains, rattling. Lies! He barked, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. The judge's gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot. Order, sit down, Mr. Mitchell. Harold glared at the jury, but his rage had already etched itself into their memories. Then came my turn. My body trembled too violently at first to rise, but I gripped my crutch and forced myself up. Every eye in the courtroom followed me as I limped toward the witness stand, the echo of my steps louder than the murmurs behind me. I sat, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. The prosecutor's voice softened as she asked Clara, "Can you tell us what happened that night?" My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. At 2 a.m, Harold came into my room with an axe. Donna was behind him. Dylan watched from the hallway. Harold told me I was nothing. Then he swung. I paused, my hand trembling as I lifted my hair to reveal the bandaged wound where my ear had once been. Gasps broke through the silence. My heart pounded, but I pressed on. I remembered Donna's face. She smiled. She smirked as I screamed. Her silence and her laughter cut deeper than the blade. I begged them to stop, but they watched as though it were a lesson. My voice cracked, but I forced it louder. They always said silence was my place, but silence almost killed me. Today I refuse it. Today I speak. The room went still, pens scratching as reporters scribbled furiously. Even the judge leaned forward, his eyes fixed on me. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man with a tailored suit, rose with a polished calm. "Miss Mitchell," he began. Isn't it true that your journals could simply be the imaginings of a dramatic girl? Isn't it possible you exaggerated? His words were smooth, but Melissa didn't give me time to falter. She pressed play again. My screams, Harold's roar, Donna's laugh. The sound cut through the courtroom, undeniable, irrefutable. No polished words could erase that. The defense faltered, and the jury's eyes stayed locked on me. Other witnesses followed. Former ranch hands spoke of Harold's cruelty of beatings and threats that had gone unreported. A retired teacher admitted he had once seen bruises on my arms, but had been too afraid to speak. Neighbors confessed that they had long suspected but never dared intervene. Their voices piled together stone upon stone, building a wall of truth too heavy for Harold's silence to hold back. Each testimony stripped away another layer of the Mitchell myth. Donna's turn on the stand came late in the trial. Melissa asked her directly, "Did you laugh when your daughter was attacked?" Donna's lips trembled. "I did what I had to do to keep the family together." Her voice cracked, but the words fell like poison in the silent room. Whispers erupted again, louder now, sharper. The gallery that had once admired her cobblers and her soft church smile now stared as if they had never known her. Melissa's voice cut like glass. "Keeping a family together does not mean watching your daughter bleed. It means protecting her." By the time the prosecution rested, the atmosphere inside the courtroom had shifted. Harold no longer carried himself like a man of authority. His shoulders slumped, his jaw locked, his silence no longer a weapon, but an empty shell. Donna's face sagged under the weight of shame. Dylan had vanished from the gallery, unable to watch the family's image shatter in front of an entire community. The defense tried to salvage what it could, speaking of Harold's hard work, of Donna's devotion to church, of Dylan's bright future. But their words fell flat against the recording, the blood-stained acts, the testimony of witnesses who had finally broken their silence. Respectability crumbled under the weight of truth. When the judge adjourned for the evening, I rose slowly, leaning on my crutch. I looked across the room at Harold, his eyes burning with hatred, and at Donna, her lips pressed tight. For the first time, I did not look away. For the first time, the silence belonged to them. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras, flashing microphones thrust toward me. "What do you want to say to the people of Wichita Falls?" Clara, they asked. I lifted my chin, my voice steady despite the ache in my body. They tried to take my ear, but they did not take my voice. Silence was their weapon. Speaking is mine. My words echoed across the courthouse steps, printed in headlines the next day, carried beyond the town that had once erased me. The verdict was still days away, but the collapse of the Mitchell family had already begun. Their silence, once unshakable, had been shattered in public, and every whisper in Wichita Falls carried that truth. The morning of sentencing dawned bright and merciless, the Texas sun glaring white against the limestone steps of the Travis County Courthouse. Heat shimmered off the pavement as reporters clustered outside microphones, raised cameras humming. I stood at the bottom of the steps, leaning on my crutch, the hem of my skirt brushing against my prosthetic. The bandages were gone now, replaced by scars and steel. Each movement still ached, but pain had become part of my rhythm, not a prison. The courthouse loomed above me, and this time I was not walking into battle, but into justice. Inside the courtroom was silent, every bench packed with townsfolk who had once turned their faces away. They sat with their hands folded, their eyes fixed forward, the weight of recognition heavy in their gazes. At the defense table, Harold sat shackled at the wrists. His broad shoulders bent, his jaw tight. The swagger that had once made men clap his back at rodeos had withered into a grimace. Donna sat beside him, her blue dress wrinkled, her hair pulled too tightly into a bun, her face pale. She clutched a Bible in her lap, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dylan was absent, having slipped out of Wichita Falls weeks earlier, his truck seen heading south toward Houston. Rumors swirled he had crossed into Mexico, leaving his parents to face the ruin alone. The judge, robes heavy in the heat, read the verdict with steady precision. Harold Mitchell, guilty of attempted murder, sentenced to 25 years in state prison. Donna Mitchell, guilty of complicity, sentenced to 10 years behind bars. The words landed like thunder. Harold cursed, his voice breaking as deputies hauled him to his feet, the chains on his wrists rattling louder than his defiance. Donna sagged her shoulders, folding inward, her silence finally collapsing under the weight of truth. She whispered something under her breath, too soft for me to hear, but it did not matter. For years, she had chosen silence. Now, silence was her sentence. The gallery remained hushed. No applause, no gasps, only the sound of papers rustling and feet shifting against wood. The collapse of the Mitchell name was not just a legal matter. It was a social reckoning. The family that had been held up as a model of discipline and devotion was now a cautionary tale. Their myth had shattered under the harsh light of evidence and testimony. When the judge's gavel struck, I rose slowly, leaning on my crutch. My body trembled, but not with fear, with release. I turned, facing the room that had once been filled with whispers, dismissing me as dramatic, invisible, or weak. Now they stared with wide eyes, their faces pale. For the first time, they could not look away. The silence that had once suffocated me now belonged to them. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted over one another. "What do you want to say to the people of Wichita Falls, Clara?" My voice steadied clear and firm. They took my ear, but they did not take my voice. Silence was their weapon. Speaking is mine. The words carried across the courthouse steps, printed in headlines the next day, broadcast on evening news. For years, my voice had been erased inside my own home. Now it echoed across counties. The legal consequences rippled outward. Deputies strung bright tape across the Mitchell Ranch gates. Trucks hauled cattle to auction, their lowing echoing across empty fields. Barns once filled with activity stood hollow, their doors swinging in the hot wind. Neighbors slowed their pickups when they passed, shaking their heads, whispering through open windows. For the first time in decades, the Mitchell land stood vulnerable. Respect that had been welded to their name crumbled overnight. Donna's punishment was harsher in the streets than in the courtroom. Though she remained in town under guard until her transfer, the women who once praised her cobblers now turned away in grocery aisles. Conversations hushed when she entered, eyes cold, backs stiff. At checkout counters, cashiers spoke only what was necessary, sliding her items across without a smile. Silence followed her down every aisle, heavier than insults. The woman who had chosen silence as her shield now bore it as a brand of shame. The church shifted too. On Sunday morning, the first pew once proudly occupied by Harold, Donna, and Dylan sat empty. Pastor Whitmore hesitated at the pulpit, his sermon faltering as he spoke of truth and justice. Congregants shifted uneasily, the recording of Donna's laugh still echoing in their minds. Whispers carried across pews. How could we have been so blind? How long had this gone on? Faces bent not in prayer but in shame. For me, healing came in fragments. At the orthopedic clinic in Austin, I spent hours learning to walk again, each stumble a reminder of what had been taken. The prosthetic felt foreign at first, clunky, unyielding, but my therapist urged me forward. One step, then another. I fell. I cried. I cursed. And then I rose again. The day I walked the length of the rehab room without stumbling, I pressed my palms together and whispered, "I am still here." The emotional scars were harder. Nights were restless, haunted by the creak of floorboards, the flash of the axe, the sound of Donna's laugh. A counselor guided me through the darkness, teaching me that trauma leaves scars, but scars can be carried with meaning. My journal, once a secret weapon, became a tool for recovery again. I filled its pages with reflections, with quotes, with promises to myself. One line I wrote and underlined twice. They wanted silence to define me. I chose voice instead. With Evelyn's encouragement, I founded a small nonprofit in town called Silent No More. It began in a single rented room above the library, its furniture secondhand, its sign plain, but its mission clear. Women who had endured violence could come there, be heard, be guided to resources, be believed. Evelyn sat at the desk most days, greeting each visitor with her steady presence and her ever-ready cup of coffee. The first woman who walked in carried a toddler on her hip, a bruise blooming across her cheek. Her voice trembled as she said her husband told her no one would believe her. I lifted my hair, showing the scar where my ear had been, and said, "They told me the same, but they were wrong." She wept, and in that moment, I knew my pain had become a bridge to someone else's hope. News of the foundation spread. Local papers covered it, then regional outlets. Reporters who once wrote of the trial now wrote of the mission. They printed photographs of me standing tall, one hand holding my journal, the other resting lightly on the shoulder of a young girl who had come with her mother. From silence to strength, the caption read. Letters poured in survivors across counties writing that my story gave them courage to speak. At the grocery store, strangers thanked me quietly, their eyes heavy with regret. We should have spoken sooner. We should have seen. Their remorse did not erase the years, but it chipped away at the wall of silence that had once smothered me. At Fort Sill, I returned to training slower now, but steadier. My superiors gave me time understanding that healing was its own form of service. My squad mates cheered when I ran a drill for the first time on my prosthetic sweat-pouring lungs burning, but determination carrying me through. "You're tougher than steel," one of them said, clapping my back. I smiled, not because I believed it fully, but because I was beginning to. On the anniversary of the attack, I stood again on the courthouse steps, this time not with reporters, but with Evelyn and a handful of women from Silent No More. The sun dipped low, painting the sky bruised purple and gold. I lifted my prosthetic hand toward the horizon and whispered the line I had once scrawled in my journal. Silence is their weapon, but when broken, it is stronger than any blade. The words carried like a promise, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been erased. Months later, I was invited to speak at a community hall in Austin. The room filled with people of all ages, but it was the older faces I saw most clearly. Men and women over 50 leaning forward, their eyes sharp, their expressions heavy with recognition. I stepped to the podium, my crutch resting against its side. I told them my story, that silence had been demanded of me for years, that laughter and dismissal had been weapons sharper than any blade. I told them silence almost killed me, but speaking saved me. When I finished, the room rose in applause. Some wept openly, some whispered, "I understand." Others simply stood tall and steady. In that moment, I knew my story had reached them. The generation who had grown up burying secrets, who had been told appearances mattered more than truth, now listened. Now they were ready to break their own silences. That was my legacy, more powerful than land, more enduring than inheritance. Not in cattle or property, but in voice. My scars did not vanish, but they became symbols of survival. My prosthetic did not replace what was lost, but it carried me forward. Freedom was never the land we owned or the family name carved into courthouse records. Freedom was truth spoken aloud, carried forward, shared, and believed. I had chosen that freedom, and in choosing it, I had turned silence into strength. When the trial ended and the courthouse emptied, I thought silence might finally settle into something comforting. But silence does not simply vanish. It transforms. For me, silence became a choice, no longer a sentence. And it is that choice I want to leave with you. For anyone listening to my story, whether you are in Wichita Falls or thousands of miles away, I want you to hear the lesson carved out of blood bone and truth. Silence protects no one. Silence is the cage, the chain, the eraser. And breaking it is not only survival, it is the beginning of freedom. I know many of you watching are older. You have lived decades in families and marriages in towns where reputation mattered more than truth. Maybe you were told not to speak, to keep the peace, to hide bruises under long sleeves, or tuck pain behind polite smiles. Maybe you believed that was strength. I want to tell you I believed the same until one night at 2:00 a.m. silence almost killed me. It may not be an axe in your story. It may be words that cut deeper than steel dismissals that stole your worth, or years of invisibility that made you doubt your own existence. Abuse wears many faces. Control can be shouted or whispered, public or private. But the result is always the same. You begin to believe silence is safer than truth. That was the lie I lived for 19 years. I want you to ask yourself something hard. How many times did you stay quiet because you thought it would protect you or someone else? How many times did you lower your eyes at a dinner table in a pew, in a kitchen filled with tension just to keep things from breaking? And what did it cost you? For me, it cost an ear, a childhood, a family name that should have meant love, but instead meant fear. But it also gave me clarity, because once silence was broken, once the truth spilled into the light, the chains that held me lost their power. That is why I founded Silent No More. Not because I wanted a building or a name on a door, but because I wanted proof that voices carry further when they rise together. The first woman who walked in told me her husband said no one would believe her. Those words echoed my past. And when I told her they were wrong, she wept because she realized she wasn't alone. And neither are you. I speak now directly to those over 50, those who carry decades of silence on their shoulders. You were taught to endure, to sacrifice, to serve families and communities, even at the expense of your own truth. But age does not lock you out of freedom. In fact, it gives you something younger generations are still searching for: perspective. You know how silence corrodes, how it passes from one generation to the next. You know the cost of secrets kept too long, and you have the chance now to break them. You may ask, what difference can I make at this stage of life? The answer is simple. Your voice may save someone who still believes they are alone. Your story may free a granddaughter, a neighbor, a friend. Your truth may spark courage in someone watching silently from the corner of a room, wondering if they matter. When I stood on the courthouse steps and said, "They took my ear, but not my voice," I was speaking not only for myself, but for everyone who has ever been told to shut up, to disappear, to keep quiet for the sake of peace. Peace built on silence is not peace. It is surrender. Real peace comes when truth is spoken aloud and justice takes root. So here is my call to you. If you have lived in silence, break it. Speak your truth, even if your voice trembles. Write it down. Tell a friend. Share it with your children. Record it if you cannot say it out loud. Every word is a crack in the wall that has hidden you for too long. If you are a neighbor, do not close your blinds when someone crawls past your porch bleeding. Do not switch off the light and pretend you didn't hear. I know how tempting it is to believe someone else will step in, that silence is safer than involvement. But silence is complicity. The night I crawled through Wichita Falls, the town's silence cut me as sharply as Harold's axe. Do not be that silence in someone else's life. If you are a parent, never believe that protecting an abuser preserves a family. Donna Mitchell thought silence kept her home intact, but what it did was destroy her daughter, and in the end, destroy her too. Protecting cruelty is not love. Love is standing between harm and your child, even if it costs you everything. If you are a survivor, remember this evidence is power, but your voice is more powerful still. I kept journals, took photos, wrote dates and times. That saved me in court. But what truly saved me was the decision to speak, to refuse silence. You have that same power. And if you are older, if your body carries scars and your memories are heavy with years of silence, do not believe it is too late. Healing does not have an expiration date. Breaking silence is not only for the young. It is for anyone who has breath left in their body. I have sat with women in their 70s who told their truth for the first time and felt decades of weight lift. Do not rob yourself of that freedom by believing silence is all you have left. I will not pretend breaking silence is easy. It will cost you. It cost me blood. A body that will never be whole again, nights haunted by nightmares. But what silence cost was worse: invisibility, erasure, humiliation. When I finally spoke, when I stood in court and said, "They always told me silence was my place, but today I refuse it," I felt something I had never felt before. Power. That power is not unique to me. It belongs to you, too. Every survivor, every witness, every bystander who chooses to act instead of hiding behind silence carries that same strength. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: you are not erased. You are not invisible. Your scars, whether seen or hidden, are proof you survived. And survival is the first act of resistance. Speaking is the second. So I ask you, watching now, where are you in your own silence? What truth have you buried? Who might be waiting for you to break it? If you feel moved by my story, do more than listen. Speak. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, or share a moment when silence weighed heavy on your life. Not because the internet fixes wounds, but because speaking even a fragment of truth in public chips away at the fear that holds us all captive. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine. Stories that remind us we are not alone, that silence is never the end. Share this video with someone you know who may still be living under the weight of secrets. Sometimes a single story can be the spark that changes everything. And if you are living in danger right now, please reach out. Call a hotline, a friend, a neighbor. Do not crawl alone through the night like I did begging doors to open. There are people who will open theirs. There are people who will stand with you. Silent No More was built for you. I lost an ear, but I gained a voice. And with that voice, I will keep speaking until every silence is cracked open, until no woman or man or child is left erased. That is my vow. Let it be yours too. Because when silence is broken, it does not just free the speaker, it frees everyone who hears.